Welcome back to Finance and Liberty and Reluctant Preppers. We have a first-time guest tonight. Rodney Leatherman is a research scientist and engineer who's been spending a lifetime working in the energy efficiency space to help people become more independent. He's a nationally syndicated radio host, and he's the founder of DropYourEnergyBill.com, where you can find out lots more about him. Rodney, thanks for joining us this first time.
It's my pleasure.
I wanted to let people know that there's an impressive timeline of events, the things that you've been involved in on your website, DropYourEnergyBill.com. Back in 1973, the Arab oil embargo, which I remember well, led you to question why people were so dependent and the consumption side of our energy vulnerability. And then in 80 to 84, you were directly involved in the development of the Energy Star ratings and solar panel manufacturing. Anybody that's bought electric appliances recently has certainly seen Energy Star ratings, so they're familiar with that, why that's of interest to people. And then in the 1987 to 1996 range, you led the introduction of high-efficiency U8 tin window factors to the market. And 2000 to 2012, you procured a federal grant from Oak Ridge National Laboratory to lead today's net zero goals. And we're going to talk more about what net zero means, why it's important, and why it may be overused by people who aren't really taking it to full advantage that you're going to tell us about. In 2003, you were appointed VP of the Truffion Radio Network and the nationally syndicated Energy Efficiency Home Remedy Show. 2003 to 2012, developed additional net zero standards for cost-effective results into homes, offices, and buildings. And on it goes to helping people through your current, in the present, Drop Your Energy Bill radio on the Genius Communication Network in Westwood One, and you're helping people learn how they can reduce their energy dependency in multiple ways. And folks, we're going to find out from Rodney how we can reduce our energy consumption so that we become save funds for one thing, become more financially independent right away at that. But secondly, become more energy independent. So if people want to live off-grid or be more independent of interruptions in the supply of publicly provided power, for example, we can make sure that we're reducing our consumption to help with that equation. So there's so much to cover. If you could first get back to that, what the mission is for you on DropYourEnergyBill.com, and what really sparks your passion about why that's so important to you.
Well, it's to educate people first and foremost, Duncan, because with education, you have the power, you have the ability. You know, I joke and say the electric company is not a power company, they're an electric company. You're the one with the power, and you're the one with the ability to make decisions that affect you, your family, your friends, your circle, your business associates with understanding. And for so many years, people have just been left with the belief that, well, we just have to pay the utility bill. We just have to pay it. We have no choice. And you get accustomed to just paying it. You put it on automatic debit, and it just comes out of your account. And, you know, at the end of the year, you've spent $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. The average 2,000 square foot house uses in excess of $350 per month. And with the technologies I've developed, the average 2,000 square foot house should be able to do common sense things and have their utility bill somewhere between $50 and $60 a month. This is the basic standard that is created, and I put a little sign-up sheet on the website called the .70 Club. Now, this is a basic formula I developed. Take your square footage times your utility bill, and that should not exceed in a 2,000 square foot house, for example, $140. 0.70 of your square footage divided by your utility bill, and that gives you the number you should be. Once you get to that point, then you can get excited and motivated to start moving down the path towards net zero ready, which is a different category than net zero. Net zero means that we're obviously having generation at the point of use or very close to the proximity of point of use. The grid as it's existed now for 120 plus years in the country is a macro grid. It's all connected now all over the country. And a few years ago, politicians even talked about connecting us to South America and Central America with the grid, so we would have one giant grid. So far, that's not happened. But in the summertime, Our peak demand for electricity in this country exceeds 99% of the generation side. So if we don't address consumption, and at the same time, we've got facilities that are generating energy. In fact, about 26% of all the energy generated in the country comes from nuclear generation. And all but a couple of these plants are past their licensed life expectancy. So they're getting relicensed, and the demand continues to be there. There are problems with some of these nuclear plants as far as some of their issues ongoing. And in the news, we hear things about this from time to time, not a lot. But I think commerce precedes common sense in these things. So the reason that I do what I do is to try and get people to wake up and realize energy affects us all. It's something we have to have. We can't live without it in the modern world. And also, I like to reflect back and say, you realize 150 years ago, the whole country, the whole world practically was net zero.
Yeah.
I mean, it's our technology and all the advancements that have created the demand side. So that's the point.
So on the path to helping people achieve this energy independence at the domestic level, what are some first steps that you want people to at least be aware of, to gain their awareness of, that most people don't even think about? We just take it for granted. You mentioned one was we just take for granted we have to pay our utility bill, and there's nothing we can do about it significantly. What's the first step, or your first few steps in breaking free from that kind of a mind fog that we've been walking in?
Well, first you have to realize you can do something about it. And using that formula that I mentioned, you can realize that you have a real problem, because an average house of 300 in excess per month is 2,000 square feet. Well, that's way outside our beginning formula. So the biggest three things that people need to realize that cause energy inefficiency is air infiltration, and air infiltration. Because as you have air moving in, you see, let's take examples of a central heating cooling system. Most homes or offices or buildings have ductwork in them. This ductwork creates a negative pressure in order to move positive pressure through the duct system. When it creates a negative pressure, any leakage points anywhere on the perimeter or even interior walls of a home, office, or building, you're going to have that negative pressure pull in that moist, humid, hot or cold air from the outside. So what that does inside the building is create something called stratification. Stratification is simply a colder temperature on the floor, hotter temperature on the ceiling. So if you want to become energy efficiency conscious, then realize that you have to destratify the air. With the technologies I've developed, you should have the temperature from the floor to the ceiling be no more than 2.5 degrees. Most homes, offices, and buildings have from 12 to 20 degrees differential. And this is a scientific way to describe air changes per hour. When you talk about air changes per hour, this is the amount of times that every cubic foot of air in your home, office, or building exchanges with the outside air. Well, if you're trying to condition the outside air and keep your space comfortable, then it's going to cost you a lot of money. And so that's in essence what people do. It's like Grandpa used to say, close the door. Most people don't close the door, and they don't realize, well, the door's not open, but sure it is all around the perimeter. And even if you have a crawl space, you're creating a chimney effect where air moves in, it's drawn through the conditioned space, and then exit right out the attic. So it's just going straight out and costing you comfort first and foremost, because that's the reason people want heating and cooling systems. They want to be comfortable. And comfort is expensive if you don't address it. So we get into then the sizing of heating and cooling systems. So let's say the average heating and cooling guy, you call and you got a 2,000 square foot house. You say, I need a new heating and cooling system. That's what they're telling me I need to do to increase my efficiency. Well, that's not necessarily, and in most cases, probably not the thing you should do first. because your heating cooling system is in part something we can relate to generation from, say, solar or wind or any other source, because your heating cooling system provides you with that thing that you're looking for, which is comfort. So a 2,000 square foot house, typically your HVAC tech would come out and say, well, you need 5 tons of heating and cooling. Well, a ton of heating and cooling is 12,000 BTUs, or 12,000 British thermal units. In the technology that we're talking about, the listeners have an opportunity to drop that required demand down to around 12,000 BTUs by just changing the envelope. And we use that term kind of like you would a regular envelope you put things in. You put things in it and you seal it. If you seal that envelope, what you put in there is going to be protected, safe, and transported. But we don't think about the envelope, if you will, being the shell of the home office or building.
So one thing that occurs to me when you talk about infiltration, our current residents, when we moved here, I always wondered why it felt like that we could never get the basement, for example, which has we finished it into a rec room, that kind of thing, comfortable. It was always just ice cold down there, and it felt like it was a draft. I couldn't figure it out. Right. And I actually discovered that during the construction of the home, they had not actually sealed off along the foundation wall where the outside wall met the foundation. I could actually put my hand. I pulled out some insulation that had been stuffed in there to fill that gap, and found that I could put my hand right outdoors. And so I had to rework all of that, and I found that before I had to add all kinds of heat to make the basement habitable and comfortable. And now I don't need that extra heat at all because we're not having that infiltration. And besides, we're getting windblown dust coming in too. So, but the opposite is what occurred to me was with as many artificial building materials as people have these days, they're often concerned about getting fresh air changes just so that you don't end up with like a sick building syndrome where you've got too much captive air and not enough fresh air coming in. So is that something that you also address as part of this? Is if you are going to prevent that infiltration, let's make sure you've got clean air inside the house as well?
Yeah, and instead of spending a lot of time and money and energy getting all these, quote, experts out to give you opinions on that, the simple, easy thing to do is and I'm big on DC power. DC direct current gives you the ability, and that's a direct current. Use your car battery as a good thing to realize how direct current works. You have a positive and negative pole. The energy comes in and goes out. It moves in one circular path. It doesn't alternate like your AC current does, which in the U.S. is 60 cycles per second. That's a lot of boom, boom. So it's why the cloud, the servers, the computers, all are DC. People don't realize this, but they're direct current because they can't have that alternating interruption. And as we have cryptocurrencies being mined now, and we have more servers in the cloud being developed, incredible amounts of energy are demanded. So when we talk fresh air, we go back to the DC component. We put in a small little ventilation fan in the bathroom or in that area. We're going to need that anyway. And the DC ones only use about a nickel in 24 hours. So if you're concerned about fresh air, you simply, and this is another misnomer, a lot of people think that's a big deal, and it is. I'm not downplaying it, but if we didn't have air changes per hour to a degree, like doors being opened and closed as we go in and exit, then our vent hoods on our cooktops wouldn't work, our clothes dryers wouldn't work. None of these things would work because you have to have air coming in to be exhausted. So I like the common sense approach, less than $100, gets you a DC bath vent fan. They've got all kinds of cool ones out there, a lot of different brands. I don't per se recommend one. Just make sure it's DC. And then plug it in. The thing uses a nickel in 24 hours. I mean, that's kind of and they'll last for many, 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 many years. So that's what I use. That's what I recommend.
So following on that train of thought that you started down is people becoming aware that they have more control than they think they have over the domestic demand side of the equation. But so what is another thing beyond infiltration that they needed to take control of in order to make some real advances with a typical residence on their energy demand?
Well, I like to take a baby step approach and look at the things that we can do first for no money. One thing you can do for no money, see, water heating constitutes up to 25% of your entire utility bill. Up to 25%. That's a huge number, okay? So what my wife and I do, I've simply identified the breaker in the panel, and I've also put a timer on the heater itself. So we have two options. We can either set the timer, depending on our schedule, or we just flip the breaker off. And then I've wrapped that water heater with a really nice thermal blanket, just like when you're cold, you put a sweater on and the cool. Well, you do the same thing with your water heater, because standby loss is a big issue with water heaters. You heat the water. And here's the other thing is we dump cold water into the hot water that's supposed to be heated. It's redundant and it makes no sense, but, quote, that's the way we do it. So if you can preheat your incoming groundwater just by having lines in a space where they're already exposed to some temperatures, obviously wrap those lines as they make their way to the point of use, be it your shower, your faucets, and then put on water efficient things at those places. Shower head that I like uses a half gallon a minute. Half gallon of water a minute. So 80% of that's hot water. So now you can take, for no money basically, and drop about 20% out of your total bill just by addressing hot water. That's a huge number. Then you can also go around and start unplugging things. We call it vampire energy. But how many times do you leave your cell phone charger, your computer charger, your coffee maker, your toaster oven, your vacuum cleaner? All these things use micro amounts of energy. Even though you're technically not using them, they still consume energy. Unplugging them costs you no money. It does require discipline, but it costs you no money to do that. Another thing with the air infiltration that's simple, and I developed a little thing that I call the energy saving pack, and it's got a lot of stuff in there. It's on the website. It's about $100. But if you get sealers, little gaskets, they're made out of rubber, you put them behind your outlets and switches, then you can stop a tremendous amount of air infiltration. They cost virtually nothing, a few cents. But simple, easy way for people to scientifically test, and it doesn't sound scientific, but it is. If you wet the back of your hand and go around the exterior and interior walls around your outlets and switches, you'll find that you can feel draft or movement of air coming in. So then you get some caulk, $3 tube of caulk, a gun, and some of those sealers, and then you start tightening the house. Again, very, very little cost. When you look at insulation as the next step, how much insulation do you have? Now, I will share with the listeners this that I learned many years ago. We've all heard the term R value. It means resistance to heat flow or heat loss. This test was developed in '72, and it uses a 72-degree box. Now, how much insulation do you need at 72 degrees? Don't need any. But yet, R values are created and they have their basis in a 72-degree box. So R values are a myth. They're a joke. They're not factual. And I can prove it real quick. When you have a pizza, you go pick up a hot pizza. It's in a cardboard box. You leave the lid on. It's cardboard. It has no R value. You leave the lid on it. You carry it home 30 minutes later. You open it up. It's still hot. But within a few minutes after you've opened the lid, now the pizza starts to cool quickly. But as long as you had the lid closed, that cardboard had an ability to insulate. Just because it doesn't have R value doesn't mean that it doesn't have insulation qualities to it. So insulation is the next big one. And insulation around that envelope, and we can get into some details on it, on how I recommend that people do that. But if you got a crawl space, the idea of having these ventilation things down in you always seal a crawl space in an attic completely. Some people call it encapsulation. I call it sealing. Encapsulation works, though. You just seal it completely off so there's no air infiltration whatsoever in the attic or the crawl space. See, for years, if you ventilate your crawl space and then you have a ridge vent or ventilation in your attic, you just created that perfect chimney effect to exhaust all your nice heated and cooled air, which now you do need a 5-ton heating cooling system for, because it's got to condition all that other space. Another thing is, if you can do it practically, move your ductwork to the conditioned space in which it's in, so you don't have any duct loss. See, 70% of your heating and cooling, that's 70% of your bills, heating and cooling. So 90% of ductwork leaks. So if your ductwork's leaking, give an example out in Arizona. I was out there and 5 tons of heating and cooling, 2,000 square foot house. Most of it, 3 tons of that, was calculated to be just to condition the ductwork as it moved through the attic just to get down to the space that wanted to be kept cool. And it's back to water, kind of the same way. If you insulate those water lines, they're just a delivery system for your heated water, like ductwork is for your heated and cooled air. So,
are you a fan of continuous or point-of-use water heaters as opposed to storage tanks?
Well, here's my take on it, and I'm rolling out something here in just a few weeks that I've worked on for a while and been field testing in one of my houses, which is a magnetic induction water heater. So it blends the very best of instantaneous. I mean, it'll boil the water in 15 seconds. So are you familiar with the magnetic induction cooktops?
I've heard of them. I haven't used one.
A magnetic induction cooktop will boil water in about 15 seconds because it takes all the energy, puts it not in the pot, but what's in the pot. So with these new technologies being able to be applied to water heating now, point of use I like, but I just attended the world's largest heating and cooling show in Orlando a week and a half ago. And a lot of these companies are there, names that if I gave them, the listeners would know. And they have these point of use units. And I said, well, what's the kW consumption on this? If I want to go from 50-degree groundwater rise, okay, well, you got to have at least 6 kW to do that. Now, that's 6,000 watts of energy. And you got to have a 40 amp breaker, and you got to do all these, or 60 amp breaker. So I like to do things a little bit more practically and say, why do we want to have such a large kW demand when all we're really trying to do is deliver heated water to the point of use? So I do like them, but the magnetic induction, I think, is superior to the ones that are on the market using a traditional 6,000 watt element.
So you're describing there that 6,000 watt would be for a whole house tankless system, basically, just be able to
No. These are just your point of use where you're actually at the point of use.
Okay.
And they have to be wired 220, so now you got to get a special electrician to come out and actually do the 220 wiring. It's expensive, and how do you get a payback? I always like to look at return on investment. And if I can take my savings from my energy and I can do other things with that, now I can exponentially grow my financial independence and my energy independence simultaneously.
A minute ago, you touched on insulation. What are your favorite methods? There's been so many different insulation technologies through the decades. Yes.
Well, as I mentioned, the R-value system developed on a 72-degree hot box, as it was called. The fiberglass industry primarily used that because they needed a way to market the insulating quality of their product, which glass is strands of glass. I mean, your furnace filter is made out of fiberglass. And as long as there's no lint on it, then air moves right through it. But if you put 1/8 of an inch of lint on that filter, which is fiberglass, then no air moves through it. That, by the way, is something else you can do that costs nothing, is to make sure your lint filter is always kept clean. I like to just vacuum them off instead of replacing them because they hold up fine for years if you do that. You don't have to go get a new one. You just vacuum it off. and it'll give you up to a 10% increase in your efficiency of your existing system. But the best value in insulation, although we have many kinds of foam insulations today, the best value and the most responsible insulation, I think, is cellulose, which is ground up newspaper. And that cellulose is treated. You always want to get one treated with boric acid because boric acid makes it fireproof and bug-proof. So it'll actually dehydrate any kind of bugs that get in it, and it's also fireproof. So, and the value system, and what we learned over the years is the R value is not the true value. And what you always want to find is the true value of something, just like the analogy with the pizza box. Another one to think about when you think about insulation is you get coffee or something hot in a foam cup. That foam cup's 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, you can hold that in your hand. It can be 140 degrees. You can hold that in your hand. It won't burn you. It's 1/8 of an inch thick. It has no R value, but it certainly has insulating ability. Many of the listeners remember the old thermos bottles. Had no R value, but you could put something hot in it and it'd stay hot for 8 hours. It was just the fact that it had dead air space between the exterior and the interior components, and therefore you get this increased efficiency. So what you really want to think about is creating an envelope in your house like a thermos bottle, your business, wherever it is. It doesn't have to have R value tied to it necessarily, but you want the insulating ability of the product. And I like cellulose, and that true value line that we talk about in cellulose in your attic, for example, is 17 inches. That's where and most people think, oh, all I need is 10 inches. Well, that's why you have high utility bills. And cellulose is the cheapest form of insulation you can get. It's do-it-yourself stuff. You can go to the box store and get the machine and buy the stuff and blow it in yourself. Doesn't cost a lot of money. Doesn't take much time. It doesn't itch, which is another benefit.
Right. Oh, my gosh. I remember helping my dad do attic insulation with fiberglass. It was terrible.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was the first job I had at 16 was putting insulation in houses. And I didn't stay there that long because once my clothes got mixed with the families, my dad said, enough's enough of that. So.
Everybody was itching in your household.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So cellulose, 17 inches. So whatever you've got in your attic now, just come in and top it off and bring it up to a total of 17 inches. That, in many cases, will also, because you're blowing it out to the eaves, that'll stop that air infiltration. And then make sure if you have any vents in your roof, like up at the peak, make sure you seal those completely off. And then that way you don't have that chimney effect being created that's pulling the conditioned air out of your home.
So this is blowing my mind because that's what they were always telling us is be careful. Don't do the amateurish thing of thinking you're going to put a whole bunch of insulation in because you're going to plug up your soffit vents and you're not going to get that nice cold attic that you want. So you're going to get melting of snow and stuff on your roof and ice damming and water's going to come in. So how do you address all those concerns?
Well, if you're getting ice damming or melting of snow on the roof, there obviously is a heat source for it. So therein lies one of the issues. You're paying to melt your snow, which creates you more havoc. So why would you want to do that? If you have the proper amount of insulation and no air infiltration creating a drafting effect, then now you've eliminated your melting roof and your ice damming and everything else. Never, ever, ever, ever have ventilation in a crawl space or an attic.
Interesting.
Period. Now look, what's the difference in a crawl space and a basement? Typically about 4 feet, right?
Yeah.
So we don't put air infiltration, ventilation, if you will, in basements. No. So why would you put it into that? Years ago, we had a lot of building inspectors around America who really, really, really didn't understand what we were trying to do with this. But today, it's actually in the code now that you really aren't supposed to ventilate. And you can get online and look all kinds of places and see encapsulation is what you should be doing.
Another reason I thought, I'm no expert at all, but I thought the reason people ventilated crawl spaces was to reduce humidity that would breeding ground for mold, that kind of thing.
Well, now that's a great point. So if you want breeding ground for mold, you have a really dark environment, and then you open up vents that invite in moist, humid air, which now has a dark environment for it to proliferate and grow. If you seal that off and encapsulate it by taking plastic, putting it down on the dirt, running it up the side of your walls to your box band, a little bit of caulking, a little bit of tape, a staple gun, now you've created like a bathtub, if you will, down there.
Okay.
See, if you do it this way, you don't ever have to insulate your floor. This idea of insulating a floor is beyond absurd if you think about it logically. Where you want to insulate a crawl space is around the perimeter of the crawl space itself.
Right.
Then you've got a space in that crawl space which is going to be indicative of the earth temperature, which is stable in your crawl space. Yeah. So why do you need to insulate your floor? But that's the way we've always done it. See, this is the issue. We always do things because, well, that's the way we've done it. And this is why we have these issues way beyond energy. We can get into all kinds of that. That's another discussion, but you do a fantastic job on your show describing many of these other problems and the solutions for them. And so that's really, I try to stay focused on the solution, always on the solution, because the problems are innumerable.
Can we take it a little bit farther in the direction of net zero? You said we have, since we are going to be consuming some amount of energy, even after we become more efficient, in order to become net zero, does that mean we have to be producing our own energy to the same level that we're consuming?
Well, the first step is to get net zero ready. And that means that a 2,000 square foot home office or building at 10 cents a kW, your rate may vary, could be lower, could be higher. Most of them are going higher, dramatically higher. You need to get net zero ready first. And that means the formula around $50 a month for a 2,000 square foot house is what I consider to be net zero ready. That's achievable for any home that's 2,000 square feet. You can do it.
All right. So once you reduce your demand to that point, then what's your next step?
Next step is to look at how can we create a renewable, sustainable form of energy. Now, we've got a lot of things that I'm involved in on that generation side. Started in the solar business in 1981, so I've been around it for a while. But we've also got wind, small wind. And small wind is really something that many people overlook. You've also got systems now that are hydrogen generators that are out here that are becoming more and more available and affordable. And you've got the ability to also look at hydro. Now, people don't think about hydro at all, but I want you to think about it in terms of using DC, and I want you to think about creating a cistern. Now, you can fill this cistern with rainwater, and if you use a small DC pump and you've got the right kind of apparatus, you can reuse the same water over and over and over to turn a hydro generator to provide you with all the electricity that you would need. And you can do it for a very minimum cost. So you don't have to go spend $20,000 or $30,000 to get net zero per se, but most people do. I get people that call me and say, we just put in a $100,000 solar system. I say, congratulations. And they say, yeah, we don't have a utility bill now. I said, really? How much was your utility bill? Oh, it's $350 a month. Well, let's sit down and use some common sense and pencil this out. Will you ever get your $100,000 back? Never will. Because you see, solar has degradation that occurs on the panels. They do last about 25 years now, which are, I mean, that's fantastic compared to what we had just 10 years ago. But we have inverters, unless we're using an inverter that comes off the roof that converts it to AC. And then we've also got batteries if we want to utilize our energy at night. So sometimes for clients, once you get to a net zero ready point, one of the things that you might want to consider, depending, is looking at a traditional generator and then utilizing and changing your lifestyle just a little bit. Some people can, some can't, depending on what they're doing with their consumption side. See, the new thing going forward is something called net metering. And the quote, smart meter is about net metering, so that net metering can be varied in rate depending on the demand cycle. So a lot of people believe that the utility companies, the electric service providers, will charge you more during prime time when everybody's home, you're cooking dinner, you're watching TV, you're taking showers. I mean, during the day, if you don't have a battery system for your solar generation, there's nobody there. So all this solar energy you're generating, what are you doing with it?
Yeah, you're losing it. Yeah.
And so a lot of people believe, well, the only way to handle that is to sell it back to the utility company. Well, if you sell it back to the electric company, now you've got other complexities that crop up. A few of them are you're going to have to carry an insurance policy on the utility company. That's a requirement of about $1 million liability policy that you have to pay for the utility company. Any generation that you get, and now they've kind of tweaked it to where it's a break-even deal, so they don't have to 1099 you, because if they do pay you anything, they will 1099 you. And so that's a thing that most people don't realize. There are other things, too, that, and this came up in the big storm that hit New Jersey back several years ago. The hurricane came through. Everybody had put on these expensive solar systems, and the utility company told them, you can't use your solar at your house. We're going to use your solar for other things that we need it for, like lighting up government offices and on and on and on. So if you tie yourself to the grid for sellback, they have the ability to control and dictate when you use that energy. And how often they want to take it, they can. That's part of the agreement.
Maybe what we could talk about is the home itself. You've got another website that I was interested in, EnergySourceHome.com, where it looks like there are a variety of sizes from small to medium to large home plans that can be built. And you've been talking a lot about ways that people can retrofit their existing dwelling. But if this is for people who actually have the ability to start with the construction of a new building, why is this so either radically affordable or radically energy efficient? What's the main mission you've got here?
Well, with this, after we found that there was a belief by some scientists that people would pay 4 and 5 times the price of a regular house to get a net zero house because of the intrinsic value to the environment and so on. My belief was that that wouldn't be possible even if people had that belief system, because the average person can't afford it. So what I did was take the technology, take it several steps further, design it into a package where it could be shipped anywhere in the world, and eliminate the engineering side of it, basically, so that novice craftspeople could actually perform the work without messing up the energy efficiency side. So we use a prefabricated wall system that's 19 times more load-bearing and 25 times more wind shear resistant than a 2x6 16-ohm center wall that's already insulated and pre-chased for electrical wiring, for switches and outlets, for the exterior walls. And then depending on what you're doing with that, how the design would be for the roof system, I think the future is obviously here now. So we're going to see, and by the way, you mentioned Energy Store earlier on when I was involved with that back in the 80s. The belief there and the concept was that we could create these whole houses, these packages, if you will. And even then we were talking about, kind of like Frank Lloyd Wright was doing in the 20s,
right,
eliminating the attics altogether, because what real functionality does your attic have besides expense? So by designing flat roofs into these homes, you can now not only benefit from saving money, but you can now create an outdoor patio living space on your roof that can be utilized. So in fact, we've got one of these model homes here in the Smoky Mountains that we're going to break ground on here in the summer that'll feature a flat roof and eliminate the attic altogether. So that, in the design of the house, you also look at the insulation. So your air changes per hour are addressed. When you put this together, you get this package. And the way I designed it is you've eliminated your air changes per hour with the actual construction of it. And it comes with the glass because in the 90s, I developed this U18 glass package. People don't really equate glass and insulation in the same sentence. So if you're going to be net zero or net zero ready, you have to address glass because glass is 50% of your heating and cooling load. So let's say we're talking a 2,000 square foot house with 5 tons. If you put in the right kind of glass, you can effectively cut your tonnage requirement in half or by 50%, say to a 2.5 ton. Now, if you do that, your cost of equipment and the cost to operate the equipment, more importantly, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, has now gotten reduced tremendously. So glass is part of the package that's included in it because to get people to go find a U18 product, they're just not going to be able to do it because the marketplace doesn't feel compelled to create these products because the demand is seemingly not there. So maybe that's purposeful, maybe, I don't know. I just know that we do have it available. We also do some other things that make, to me, common sense. And that, as you know, is very uncommon today. So if we look at a piece of property and say, well, this is our dream property, we want to build our house on it. If you're not going to do a basement like you did, then the idea of doing a crawl space should be set aside. You shouldn't do a crawl space. What you do is grade down the other area, backfill that area, and then pour a slab on top of it. Because with a slab construction, not only is the cost lessened, I mean, it sounds expensive to grade and backfill, but it's still net less money than even putting in a foundation floor system, much less the actual footers and the block and and then you have to address encapsulating it on top of that. So you can spend $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 easily on a foundation that's already antiquated. So use a slab, properly insulate the slab continually from the edge to the bottom of the footer, under the footer, all the way up, and then the entirety of the slab. That way the slab is actually now part of the conditioned space. And if you have air infiltration that's not present, then now your slab is going to be basically the same temperature as the air in the house.
I see, because that's one of the concerns. We used to live in Minnesota where there's always frost heat. You know, the idea they had to get your foundation footings down below the frost line was like,
yes,
they put them down a full 6, 7, 8 foot basement to get your footings down below the frost so that there's no movement. But you're saying by insulating a slab, you can achieve the same goal of eliminating movement without needing to have to do with the cost of all that excavation?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. It's just properly insulating it. So you keep, the old rule of thumb for me is just keep what's outside, outside, and keep what's inside, inside. And now, when you do those two things, you got comfort, ultra low utility bills, and that makes for happy everybody.
The nature of these house packages that you show on your website, are they kits then that you would ship to a location and people assemble them with local assistance that they might, either if they feel handy enough themselves, they can do it themselves, otherwise they can get some local contractor to help them out, put it together?
Yeah, the thing is with contractors, typically they know more than anybody else, and they have to do it their way, and you ask them why. See, this is something that I learned a long time ago. It's, well, I know, but why do you know? And that question never gets answered. And then I love to ask contractors, well, yeah, we build all energy efficient houses. You wouldn't need to go do that. I'd say, oh, well, that's nice. I really appreciate that more than you realize because they really don't know who I am. And I say, by the way, do you have the utility bills from the last 5 you built that I could see for the last 2 years? Oh, well, no, I don't have those. Well, could you get them? Why would I need to? Well, you just said you build energy efficient. I mean, nothing tells the tale like the bill, right? That tells me whether it's efficient. All I got to do is look at the kW consumption, and I can tell you, based on my formula, that if you're over 500-600 kW a month, then you're not efficient. And if you're at 500 kW a month, now to generate 500 kW locally is easy to do on the renewable side. Another thing that people are going to see in the future is community generation.
All right.
Let's say we take this small community, could be you, could be your family member, could be a friend, and you put in common generation, and you both benefit from it. And you both share in the cost of it. But if both of you have very, very low consumption, then now the cost makes even more sense for everybody. Because the biggest thing about renewables that people don't ever think about is the cost of maintenance. And this is why I kind of like to put it back on our electric service providers and say, now, let me get net zero ready and let you be the net zero provider. I'll still pay you so that at 3 o'clock in the morning, if my electricity goes off, you can fix it instead of me. And it's worth $30-40 a month for me to do that, and then I don't have to worry about it. But if you really want to go off grid, you can do that with this. You just have to understand it's not just the generation cost, but it is the maintenance and upkeep of that generation as well.
For people who want to find out more about how they can achieve some of these cost savings and also energy savings that will give them the ability to be more independent, where do you think that they should start? Where do you recommend?
Well, I think that they really need to step back and start to use common sense. Just take a look at things and say, now, ask the why, always the question. Why is my utility bill so high? And start doing these simple little things. And that we've talked about, and there are many others that they can do too, but if they'll just stop and think about why the energy is being consumed. I mean, everybody wants to blame the electric company, right? Well, they sell a commodity product, no different than going to the grocery store. It's your consumption of that product that dictates how much your bill is every month, no different than anything else you buy. But people don't equate it that way. We've been conditioned to believe, programmed to believe, that, well, you just get the bill and pay it. So I would start first looking at my bill and getting an understanding. How much did I spend in the last 10 years on this? And if they realize and start adding that up, when you talk about return on investment, and many of the things that you teach and your listeners already know that you do, is you talk about how you're going to actually become financially free. And financial freedom, if you spend less money for electricity, you can take that money and now invest it in other things that's going to grow exponentially. At the same time, your cost has now been reduced. So you're getting a double win. And that's why I'm passionate about saving energy, because I think it just makes sense in all those ways.
We've been speaking with Rodney Leatherman. He is the founder of DropYourEnergyBill.com. And he's been talking with us both about energy consumption reduction as well as energy efficient home and cost effective homes. It sounds like there's a lot more topics we could get into in the future, but we appreciate you visiting us this first time on Finance and Liberty.
Oh, I love it. I appreciate you so much for having me, and I look forward to getting with you next time.
Thank you, Rodney. They say the stock market crashed today.
Yeah, I heard that.
Sounds like people's retirement accounts and savings accounts are going to get bailed into the banks.
Yeah.
Looks like pension plans and Social Security are going to get suspended too.
I know.
Sure, I'm glad we decided to put our money into gold and silver instead.
Me too.
Get your gold and silver and support this channel at goldsilver.com/?AFF=RP. Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions.